Aloha! Welcome back to the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. I'm your host and coach, Gina Ryan, and I'm so happy to be with you again today as we consider the many ways to bring your mind and body back to its natural peace and calm. In today's episode, I'm talking about hyperawareness, feedback loops, and anxiety. And this is a listener question and answer. Although it was stated as a concern, not so much as a question, and this was from an anonymous listener, and our listener said the following. At the start of this year, I had a lot of health anxiety, and while I don't worry about illness anymore, I feel like my body is hyper aware of several sensations, even like blinking or breathing, etc. at times. I have been going to therapy and keeping busy so as to not ruminate on it, and I think I was improving. This was until I felt an itch that won't go away, feeling in my leg, and I started fixating on it, and it worried me. Normally in the past, I've experienced this, but it's gone away. But this time, I feel like it's been there for 3 or 4 days and varies in intensity. That worries me, and what worries me is not knowing if it is just being hyper aware and constant checking of that area and making myself believe it's still there, or is it genuinely there? This is a good question or concern to send to me. Thank you to our anonymous listener for sending that in. These kind of concerns are very common, and especially common with people who are struggling with high stress or chronic anxiety and panic. What our listener writes about is probably extremely irritating, to be the least, and difficult to be thinking about and ruminating on. But what happens over time is they may be getting somewhat, quote, worried about it. And that's what we want to talk about. That's what we want to stay away from. This is why we want to nip this hyper-awareness in the bud. It can become all-consuming, especially if you lean toward being more stressed, being more anxious, because that could be a ticket to ride down to the wormhole. And I want to first say how wonderful it is that you are doing your therapy and you're staying busy, and it sounds like you're actually able to not think about it so much, but it is going to creep back in. And that's why we want to go over some ideas today on how that can all change. We don't need to be spending a lot of time in hyper-awareness. When we find ourselves in it, we want to congratulate ourselves, because then we can say, oh, this is great. I have awareness that I am doing this, and that means I can do something about it. And I also want to point out, before I get going here, that it is normal on the healing journey to have ups and downs. Healing is not from left to right, a direct, straight arrow upward. No, healing is a lot of ups and downs, back and forths, round and about. We are human, and it can take us a bit to sort things out physically and mentally. I want to talk about for a second the feedback loop that is created by fixating on a sensation. And this is where attention and checking reinforce the sensation's presence or its intensity. So we are doing this by going back to it over and over again. We are reinforcing the fact that it is there, and we are spotlighting it. So we are paying more attention to that than all of the whole rest of our body. Now, this is a normal thing to do, especially if you have had health anxiety in the past. And so I want you to grab a hold of some of the points I'm going to lay out for you today, because we can nip this in the bud. We're all going to fall into it here and there, like when you have a bad toothache or something, you might find your tongue going to that tooth all the time, just checking. And If you are a nervous type or you have high stress or anxiety, that could begin to scare you. We're bringing into a little bit too much attention, and we can start to be hyper aware or fixate on it. Here's a little bit about the feedback loop. Let's say you have a bodily sensation such as tightness in the chest or tingling in your fingers. A lot of people report that to me. Or your increased heart rate, and you don't think you should have had it for any reason. You're not running or exercising. And so you notice this initial sensation. The brain will label the sensation, and it might label it as unusual or concerning or that it's a threat. And that is when the amygdala becomes involved because it's on alert now. Oh, this is unusual. This is possibly threatening. And that attention sharpens and it gets in on the sensation. It's spotlighting the sensation. And there is heightened awareness of its presence. Now, attention sharpens on the sensation and it heightens the awareness of its presence. But the body is not working against you, but for you. You get to decide what to pay attention to and what can be set aside on the back burner for now. So how do we do that? Let's say it was the tingling in the hands and the brain is jumping into it. Okay, this is a threat. The amygdala is like, okay, I'm here. What do we got to do? Now, we want to take a beat here, take a breath here, and realize, okay, if tingling my hands, isn't that interesting? See if you can come to neutral with it. Because just a tingling in the fingers at one time or another that doesn't come again, no big deal. But I'm telling you, if the amygdala gets involved, if you are thinking that this is unusual, this is concerning or threatening, then we can be setting up a feedback loop to be more afraid of this in the future. And what do we do when we set that up? Well, we're going to be going back and testing to see if it's still there. We're going to be scanning to look and see, is my body still hurting in that area? Are my hands still tingling? We're going to be touching the area or adjusting our posture or consciously feeling for the sensation. And this is going to bring so much more attention, and that increases the perception, making the sensation seem even stronger and more persistent. This is the loop. Anxiety about the sensation can lead to physiological changes. You can have muscle tension in your body that is going to further reinforce that tingling in your hands. A lot of work was done on this by Dr. John Sarno. If you are interested in learning a lot more about that, you can read any of his books. Because we are adding to this. It isn't that the body is hurt more, it's that our mind and our attention, our hyper-awareness is causing it to be more than it was in the beginning. So we are sustaining this loop, this physiological loop that we have started. The anxiety is interpreting a neutral sensation as dangerous, and this is going to wreak havoc because, like I said before, the amygdala gets involved. It's sending out stress hormones, and we are now getting more muscle tension because we're supposed to be running or fighting or something, getting help, and we will have even more tingling in our hands. Hyper-awareness narrows our focus and makes all the other sensations fade into the background. It's almost like it's the only one we can see at that time. The brain is looking for evidence to validate the fear, ignoring all the signs of normalcy. So how are we going to break this loop? Well, we want to recognize the pattern. We want to recognize that it's come up without judgment. We want to go to neutral. Name the loop. Notice it. Say, this is a feedback loop that my body is doing. You can notice that you had a sensation and be neutral about it. Isn't that interesting? You can redirect your focus to external stimuli or neutral body sensations. You could do redirecting your focus could be things like a grounding exercise. It could be just as simple as feeling your feet in your shoes. It could be counting the coins in your pocket. Mindful listening can be very helpful because no one will notice you're doing it. Just notice the sounds around you. Or my favorite is to focus on the breath. You will notice that when you get going with this kind of a loop, your breath is going to be more shallow and it may be even going faster. So you want to slow your breath and have it go deeper. Let your diaphragm relax and extend your belly when you are breathing in and have that longer, slower exhale. That will really help to bring you back into a more calm state so you can see what is actually going on with this sensation. Maybe you could also reframe the sensation to normalize it as something that just happens with the body sometimes. You could say, yes, my chest feels tight because I'm anxious, not because I'm in danger. We can really talk to ourselves in our minds like this and make a huge difference. And you want to begin to limit the checking. Practice tolerating uncertainty and resist the urge to test the sensation over and over again. Notice that you want to check it, like let that come up, smile, and say, okay, but I don't need to check it every time I think about it. And you can use mantras like the less I check, the faster it will fade. The less I check, the faster it will fade. What a great way to be able to give your mind the idea that, yes, I know it's there, but I'm going to let it go for now. And you want to be working on your resilience here. Now, I recently did an episode about resilience, long-term habits that reduce our overall arousal, such as meditation, exercise, and getting good enough sleep can really help us to build our resilience. I want you to be reassured that these transient sensations, such as an itch, often intensify due to our hyperawareness or our stress, and they usually resolve on their own. But like I said, we can get involved in it in this feedback loop and it will last longer. But 3 or 4 days of varied intensity is unlikely to indicate a serious issue, but instead it reflects the body's natural variability. We can manage some of these sensations by a couple of different things here. The first would be for you to shift your focus and to gently redirect your attention away from the sensation. Again, this would be using mindfulness or an engaging activity. Our listener had stated that they had been keeping busy, and that may mean that they were engaging in activities. And another thing to do would be relaxation techniques, such as deep breathing, or like I said, letting your belly relax and letting your diaphragm flatten out so that you could actually get a real deep breath can be very helpful, as can progressive muscle relaxation, such as the body scan, to help reduce the nervous system's arousal system. And finally, thought reframing can be really helpful here. I want you to begin to question the catastrophic thoughts. Like, is this likely just anxiety or is hyperawareness? Like, you can just question it. It doesn't have to be a catastrophic thing. This could just be your anxiety or your stress flaring up or your hyperawareness. It doesn't have to be a catastrophic event that is happening. And the more you can stay away from that catastrophe, that imaginary catastrophe in your mind, the more calm and more centered, neutral you'll be able to think about the sensation. And one of the best places to learn how to interrupt the cycle of fear around discomfort or sensations is through meditation. When I was learning how to sit in meditation through a number of different situations and different teachers, every time I was taught to be still, to be with the itches. It was actually something that they used as an example, to be with the itches, the tickles, and all sorts of symptoms and sensations that may arise during the brief period of the meditation sit. These minor irritations allowed to be there could then be watched and noticed with awareness, without judgment. Again, we want to stay away from judgment. It's not good or bad. And we are just noticing them with awareness as they came and went. Unlike what our mind says is going to be, which is, oh my God, I have to get rid of this now or I'll have it forever. And not only that, but I will also probably have this be the death of me. Yes, that's how the mind gets our attention, which gets us to get up and do something. But you do not have to follow every thought that comes through your head, and you get to choose. But I know this is an itch. I know that I will be okay, and I am just going to let it be there. We are to hear the mind's message, and then it's our job to decide if we need to take immediate action, which is rare, or we can observe it in our meditation and let it be. Noticing with curiosity what actually happens to the symptom or sensation or the pain. When you just watch it, it's very interesting. It's not what you are expecting. Now, I do want to acknowledge that if you have something going on, I want you to listen to your body. You are the one who knows your body the best. And if you need to seek professional advice for symptoms that persist or worsen or interfere with your daily life, please do that. You know, I miss the doctors from back when I was a young mom. When I would call the doctor, you guys have heard me say this before, we would call Dr. Tulloch, and he would say, you could actually get your doctor on the phone back then, and he would listen to what was going on, which kid I was calling about, or myself, and he would listen and he would run it through his filters, his professional filters, and he almost always, 99.9% of the time, said, let's give it 24 hours and see what happens. And if you need to call me back, you can call me back tomorrow. And you know what? I rarely needed to call him back. There are things that come up with us, and it was a wonderful thing to learn, especially as a young mom. Oh, some things are not emergencies, because I was an anxious person back then. But I was learning through life that everything is not an emergency. I can wait and see. I can let it play out. And that whole idea of, does it get better or does it get worse? We can give things a little bit of time. But I want you to remember, you know your body best. And if something persists or worsens or again is interfering with daily life, you know you can check that out with your professionals in your healthcare team. But I do want to give one caution here. Be careful using Dr. Google. Often there will be many suggestions for the worst case scenario on Google, causing an increase in your stress and anxiety. And that will lead you to more rumination, and the cycle continues. We are looking for a place to break the cycle in order to get a calm perspective on the situation. So that may mean staying away from Dr. Google. I hope today's show was helpful for you. I'll be back before you know it. And now for today's quote. The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. And that's from William James. I'll be back in a few more days with another podcast. Until then, be well and aloha.